the big 2021 budget, the one that promises to be something like we've seen never before. And it is exciting times. Well, the economic survey was out today and has laid the groundwork in a sense of what we can expect from the budget. The economic survey predicts India's growth numbers in tune with what most have been seeing, including the International Monetary Fund. India is expected to contract at minus 7.7% this year and increase in growth at about between 10 to 12% for the next year. And then growth rates should stabilize around 6.8% for the year after. The chief economic advisor also believes that India is seeing and will see a V-shaped recovery. To speak on all things economy ahead of the big budget, I'm joined now by Ratin Roy, Managing Director of the Overseas Development Institute. Ratin, great to have you back on the show as always. I want to start with your take on the numbers and the letters, I would say. This V-shaped recovery, K-shaped recovery, W-shaped recovery. It's everyone's favorite alphabet soup game right now. But do you think and do you concur that we are truly on track for a V-shaped recovery, looking at the fact that the contraction this year is lesser than what was estimated earlier?
Well, I'm an economist, not a grammarian. So I won't comment on letters of the English alphabet. I would like to focus on the word recovery. So what we know is that the economy is declining. And what we know is that at the end of this year, fiscal year, the economy will be smaller than it was at the beginning of the fiscal year. So clearly there is no recovery this year on an annualized basis. The economy will be smaller in March 2021 than it was in March 2020. And if the chief economic advisor's prediction, estimate, I won't call it a prediction, it's not fair to him, is right, then it will be 7.5% smaller. That's what a negative 7.5% growth means. Now, next year, we are going to grow from that smaller number to a bigger number. So the question is, at the end of that year, will that bigger number be the same or more or less than before the pandemic, that is in March 2019? Chief Economic Advisor agrees with me that it will not. I said this to you in your previous show. Lots of silly people took offense. You mustn't take offense about numbers, it's childish. Well, now the government of India has confirmed it. The Indian economy 2 years on since the pandemic began will be smaller. Now, if it is going to be smaller, where is the recovery? So if you're asking me how long the economy will take to recover, it will take at least more than 2 years. If you believe me, it will take somewhere between 2 and 3 years. If you believe the IMF, it will take longer than that. So what alphabet are we talking about here? If you're saying that the economy has gone down and it will go up, that is a statement, that is a trite statement to make. Unless you're saying that the economy could have gone down permanently forever. It will go up someday, but I know it has not gone back to the previous level this year. So that's not a V. Last I read my English grammar books, right? The left arm of the V, letter V, and the right arm of the letter V were the same. I don't know what a K-shaped recovery is. A W-shaped recovery, if you think about it as I do like an economist and not a grammarian, a W is formed by joining two V's. So then the economy will have to go back to its previous level, and then in a W-shaped recovery, you're saying it's going to fall again and rise again. Right? You can see how unhelpful these alphabets are. Bottom line, the economy will be smaller in March 2021 than in March 2021, correct, than in March 2020. Smaller. Not growing less than expected, smaller. And it will still be smaller in March 2022, according to the Chief Economic Advisor, compared to 19. So where's the V? V is symmetric.
But Mr. Roy, many would argue that that's the case across the world.
I did not say it was not. I did not say it was not.
Ignore the fact that COVID-19 happened.
I am not ignoring it. I am stating a matter of fact. I have drawn no value judgment. It is, of course, the case across the world. I am addressing the question you asked me about alphabets. I'm making no value judgment at all about whether it's good or bad or otherwise. I'm stating a point of fact and interrogating the use of the word recovery in that context.
All right. So coming back to, say, the quality of quote unquote recovery or the kind of recovery we're seeing, because like you said, in your words, it is just obvious that we will recover after plummeting to such depths. What would you say about the quality of recovery that we are seeing? Is it satisfactory? Is it fast enough? Are we going to get back to where we need to be to, lift more people out of poverty fast enough?
See, since I don't sit in the Delhi Sultanate, I prefer to ask that question with reference to the people of India. And the question I would ask is, who has recovered to the extent that today the economy is not plummeting, as you rightly said, as it was a few months ago, and is now hopefully going to go on a path where we go back to where we were in March 19. At the end of that process, who has been hurt and who has gained? Economists like Sajid Chinoy and Prajul Bhandari have made this very clear, that this is a phenomenon where the majority of people who have survived this pandemic and made some money during the pandemic have been those who make profits. This has been a profit-led recovery. But by definition, you haven't made those profits at a macroeconomic level by increasing economic activity, because economic activity has shrunk, right? So how did you make those profits? You made those profits by selling less of what you produced, or producing less possibly and selling less, but cutting costs so that the difference between your sale price of output and the cost of the inputs needed to produce the output, that difference increased, so your profits increased. How does that increase? It increases in only two ways. If you're hiring fewer people, or you're paying people less, it's actually three ways, or you're buying less from your suppliers and therefore paying them less, and so your profit margin goes up. And so the stock and when your profit margin goes up, since you're not being taxed more, if you do not invest, then your profitability goes up even more. You have more dividends potentially to distribute. The stock market booms, and that is what you're seeing. You are seeing a very cruel situation where profit owners and asset holders have managed to have a much better COVID so far than wage earners and small businesses.
Let me shift focus to the budget, because that's the big sort of economic event, calendar event that everyone looks at. The Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman says it is a budget that perhaps has not been seen ever before. Prime Minister Modi today also said that this should be seen as a continuation of the 4 to 5 mini budgets we saw in 2020. How important is this as a marker of how well we recover? And let me ask you a specific question at the outset. How concerned are you about a fiscal deficit widening? The economic survey also says that we will overshoot. Everyone expects us to overshoot. Is there a figure beyond which overshooting would be alarming, or is it something we should not be looking at right now?
Where we should be alarmed about fiscal deficits, and let me please point out to you and your viewers that we've overshot the fiscal deficit number last year. We overshot it the year before that. So this is not a government that keeps to its fiscal commitments. Anyway. So why worry about the fiscal deficit? A lot of noise and froth is made about it. But it's not a government that, and by this government. Governments of India have one of the worst track records in the G20 of keeping their promises when it comes to fiscal deficits, etc. But there are reasons to worry about the fiscal deficit depending on how that fiscal deficit was generated in the first place. So if a fiscal deficit is generated because the government of India has stepped in, provided massive levels of income support, spent money effectively, executed infrastructure spending, then obviously it's going to have a return which is very welcome during the pandemic. But if the fiscal deficit is just substituting for taxes, and that substitution is used for business as usual expenditures with a little bit of optics here and a little bit of optics there, then I'm afraid that is a bad use of money. And that is what the fiscal deficit would signal to. So the details in the budget for me, whether it's a 100-year-old budget or a 200-year-old budget, I don't know. I'm not in the business of making grandiose claims. I've never done that in my career. Before I actually present what I have done or worked on. But the fact remains that we will have to look at the drivers of the fiscal deficit and whether that fiscal deficit has been driven by a government response to the pandemic that has helped the people of India navigate the pandemic better than they otherwise would have, or it has happened for some other reason, and that is what I will be looking for in the budget.
Everyone this time around is talking about expenditure and allocation for healthcare in the budget. In fact, the economic survey also devotes some time to it, talking about how imperative it is that we increase our allocation on healthcare as a proportion of GDP. We're at about 1% now. The hope is we go beyond that to 1.5 or even about to 2.5%. How crucial is this, and do we really have the means to do this?
We have the means, Tamanna, let me say it. We have the means to do anything that the government wants to do and is capable of doing. The question is it capable? Now, the rise in healthcare expenditure is a no-brainer. You're buying all these vaccines. You have to vaccinate people. You have to deal with COVID. Of course, healthcare expenditures are going to rise. What more do you want to do? Are you going to be able to create a permanent infrastructure of public health that in any way remotely resembles a public health service? Are you going to create a giant system of well-provisioned Medicare? If so, I'd like to see the details, because if you're not able to do it, and I'll give you an example in a minute, then this talk about increasing allocation will end up in money being wasted, and that is not a good thing. I have no objection to tripling the healthcare budget as a proportion of GDP. But I need to be sure that unlike most expenditures by Government of India, it is money well spent. Let me give you an example. I want to double it tomorrow if I'm a nationalist. I'm a patriot. I keep the word nationalist in abeyance. I think a few months ago, we were talking about the need to urgently increase our defense spending. Weren't we? Well, I'd like an answer to the question, how many jets have we bought in response to this need? And this is a long-term question, it's not this or that government. So a government that can't manage to meet its commitments on something as basic as defense is going to do expenditure on healthcare at a national level and triple and double that spending. Had better be very sure that it has the capability to do it, vastly greater than the capability it has displayed fiscally in meeting its most urgent responsibility, which is defense procurement. Right? This is the second issue from how much you should spend on defense. I'm saying you said you needed 10 fighter squadrons extra years ago.
I wanted to get your take on the vaccine question. Should India vaccinate everyone for free? Should we vaccinate some for free and others should pay more to subsidize it? And the important question is, what will vaccination achieve in terms of propelling economic growth? We're facing some resistance in terms of vaccine hesitancy. Is that a dangerous trend if we don't vaccinate enough people quickly?
The healthcare dimensions of vaccination. So I'm going to proceed on the following assumption, that the vaccines that India has chosen are correct. They are going to be as effective as predicted. Proceeding on that assumption, and that's a very important assumption because it's debated, I think India has done a terrific job in managing to procure vaccines from two major vaccine manufacturers in a very short space of time and setting up the infrastructure for vaccination that will allow 60% of the population to be double vaccinated by midsummer. And if it's going to be effective, then we must persist with it because that is a citizenry obligation of ours. That's a moral obligation of ours. Of course, it will help the economy. But like education is not just given for jobs, vaccinations are not just given so that people can come back to work. It is something we want as Indians. We want to be healthy and we want to have won the fight against COVID. And I think the Government of India and the state governments have done a wonderful job so far in at least rolling out the vaccines and planning for them. Now that being said, the second part of your question, which you asked first, should we let rich people buy vaccines? I think so. There is a question of equity here, but there is also, as you rightly said, a question of cross subsidy. My understanding is, I could be wrong, that what the government is trying to do is get the priority groups vaccinated first by about April. And then when we are coming to non-priority groups, reduce the fiscal load by allowing rich people to, commercially get themselves vaccinated over the next 6 months. And to that extent, we spend less on vaccinating citizens, our fellow citizens who cannot afford vaccines or have limited capability to afford vaccines. I think that's about the right strategy.
I want to come to the agricultural sector, and the economic survey also talks about how agricultural sector has been a support through this tough period for the economy, has been growing well. It also comments on the farm laws, which have become very contentious right now. We're all seeing what's happening with the farmer protests, tense standoffs, etc. But at the bottom of it, at the base of it, what is your view on the farm laws and what can be done to propel the agricultural sector forward?
I think we should stop thinking in terms of propelling the agricultural sector forward. As I've said several times, and as a great supporter of the Prime Minister's initiative to double farmers' income, I'm very sorry that nothing came of it. But we have to make sure that people who just live in rural areas and who work in agriculture are able to earn more than they are doing now. And that is not going to happen by getting them to produce more output. Because at the moment, our output, we actually have excess supply in many, many years in many, many commodities. The trouble is that the returns the farmers get for agricultural output is too low. So we have to increase farmers' incomes. And if the farm laws are designed to increase farmers' incomes, and farmers who are ultimately the people who decide believe that these laws will enable them to, increase their incomes, then I think we should listen to the farmers if they support these laws. Conversely, if farmers have doubts, I do not think it would be appropriate to treat them as fools or as having less wisdom than people who are not farmers. So listening and coming up with a cooperative solution where we agree that the common objective is to double farmers' income. Not the income of middlemen, not the income of commercial agricultural producers. And if there is a suspicion that the removal of the farm laws will do what happened with COVID, which is increase profits at the expense of wages, which is feed the big guys' bottom lines at the expense of the small guys, then we have to demonstrate that this will not happen in the case of the agricultural reforms we undertake. And that process of demonstration and persuasion, as an economist, I can only provide inputs. But ultimately, it's a political process. It's a matter of trust. Coercive power will not go too far in gaining that trust.
Well, thank you so much, Ratan, for joining us today and setting the tone for the big budget day. A reminder to all of our viewers to tune in to ET Now. And of course, we have a lot more coming up ahead on the show as well on Budget 2021.